Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Sarah Fenske. Next week, on Tuesday, April 6th, St. Louis voters will elect the city's new mayor, St. Louis Treasurer Tishaura Jones or Alderwoman Cara Spencer. Yesterday evening, the two candidates met on stage at 9 PBS in Grand Center for an hour-long debate. St. Louis Public Radio hosted the event in partnership with the 9 Network, 5 on Your Side, and the St. Louis American. The candidates fielded questions from journalists and voters about the important issues affecting the city and the region, speaking on everything from how they would allocate federal COVID-19 relief funds to their plans to improve police accountability. This hour, we'll listen to that debate. And here to start us off is the event's moderator, Ruth Ezell, a producer at 9 Network.
Tishaura Jones has served as the treasurer of St. Louis since 2012 and is the first African-American woman to hold the position. Cara Spencer has served on the St. Louis City Board of Aldermen since 2015, representing the 20th Ward. Joining me are Rachel Lipman, political reporter for St. Louis Public Radio, and Casey Nolan, anchor and political reporter at 5 on Your Side. The format for this debate is simple. Due to COVID-19 and social distancing restrictions, we will not have a live studio audience. For the safety of all of us here in the studio, we are spaced 8 to 10 feet apart with plexiglass partitions placed between us. Each candidate will have a 1-minute opening statement. Then we will have questions from voters and panelists with up to 2 minutes to respond. There will be time allowed for follow-ups. The order of statements has been randomly determined, and Cara Spencer, you will go first.
Good evening, and thank you for hosting this important conversation. And thank you to the viewers who will decide this election with your votes. My name is Cara Spencer, and I'm running to serve as our city's next mayor. St. Louis is in the fight of its life, and we need a leader to meet this moment of both crisis and opportunity, not with divisiveness, but with energy, unity, and hope. St. Louis needs real change, and I know change is possible. I know because I've led it in the 20th Ward by turning around some of our most challenged neighborhoods. But we need a mayor we can trust, not someone who has been embroiled in lawsuits and has a track record of issuing no-bid contracts. We need to turn the page on the cronyism and the political dynasties that have presided over decades of decline and disinvestment. It's time to take City Hall back and make City Hall work for all of us. I'm Cara Spencer. Vote for me on April 6th. It's time for real change. Let's reshape St. Louis together.
Treasurer Jones, your opening statement.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Tishaura Jones, and I use the she series pronouns. Electing a mayor with executive experience, existing relationships on the local, state, and national level, and a background in healthcare is what this moment demands. We don't have time for leadership that has to learn on the job. This campaign, at the base of this campaign, is a simple belief that you should be able to succeed here regardless of your skin color, who you love, how you worship, your zip code, or any identity you hold. This pandemic has laid bare the inequities that have always existed in our region. Racism, the unequal delivery of city services, and access to health care are issues that have permeated our policymaking decisions for generations. So to the single mom who's struggling to make ends meet, to the LGBT plus youth who are wondering if St. Louis is a home for them, and to anyone who's felt like your government has left you behind and flat out forgotten you, I see you and I'm ready to serve. I'm the only candidate ready to hit the ground running and deliver real results for the people of the city of St. Louis. Thank you.
Thank you, Treasurer Jones. We have a number of questions from viewers and listeners. The first one is from Rachel Bedell, who asks, why are you the most qualified candidate to address the city's deep racial disparities? Treasurer Jones, you have 2 minutes.
Yes, thank you for that question. Again, St. Louis is one of the most segregated and hyper-segregated cities in the country. And I believe the people who are closest to the pain should be closest to the power. And those who are closest to the problem should be closest to the solution. And I have grown up unapologetically Black all of my life in St. Louis. And I remember how North St. Louis used to look when I was a little girl. And just like investment decisions are intentional, disinvestment decisions have been intentional over decades in St. Louis, and it's time to turn the tide. And so I have the trust of my community behind me. Also, I have the trust of people who are voters and supporters who don't support me. And what I hear is a call for leadership to unify, govern, and lead on day one. And I am hopeful that the people of St. Louis will trust me to unify our community and move us forward into the 21st century.
Alderwoman Spencer, same question. How do you feel that you can address the city's racial disparities?
The city of St. Louis is #1 in the nation for being segregated racially. We have to engage in racial healing. Our history of St. Louis has resulted in a very different lived experience. The city of St. Louis was responsible for implementing racial covenants, which resulted in the segregated lived experience of St. Louisans going back 100 years. And the city of St. Louis has a role and a responsibility to breaking this down. I acknowledge that being a white person, I don't understand the lived experience of our communities of color, but I can tell you what I've done as the alderman of one of the most diverse wards in the city of St. Louis. When I took office in 2015, I ran for office to begin with because our city had closed down one of the only free public pools in the city of St. Louis, the only free public pool on the south side. When I got to City Hall, I got right to work and had that pool up and running within 3 months. I have served my neighborhoods by leaning in and listening to the communities that I represent. We all have a role and a responsibility to play in addressing the racial segregation and the different lived experience in the city of St. Louis. And as your next mayor, I will use data to address the very different delivery of city services and hold accountable the administration for breaking down and delivering city services equitably throughout the city of St. Louis. It is the role of the mayor to set the table for a real racial reconciliation. We all have a role to play, and as your next mayor, I'm committed to setting the table and bringing all of us to the table to address the inequities in our city.
We have some follow-up questions from our panelists. We're starting with Casey Nolan from 5 on Your Side.
Okay, Treasurer Jones, can a white mayor know enough about being black in St. Louis to be a mayor for all of St. Louis?
I think that we have had white mayors that have been allies and white people that have been allies, but I don't believe that a white person can understand the lived experience of a black person in this city. A white person doesn't have to tell their white children how to act when they're stopped by the police. That's a conversation I have to have with my son every time he leaves my house. A white person doesn't have to worry about their child getting hit by a stray bullet when he's outside playing. That's something that I worry about with my son, and it's almost happened to him several times in our neighborhood. So while I appreciate the role of white allies in this movement of progress, I don't believe that that they have the lived experiences to be able to lead a majority-minority city.
Alderwoman, same question. I obviously you think that a white person can, but convince voters.
Sure. When I filed to run for mayor a year ago, there was only one candidate in this race, and I filed to run because I believed I have the right tools, the right perspective, and the right experience to lead this city. My experience working with the 20th Ward, the most diverse ward in the city of St. Louis, has given me the tools. I know how to work with people, all kinds of people. I'll sit down, I know how to have a tough conversation and bring people, all kinds of people, to the table. But I do acknowledge that the history in our nation of leaders, all leaders failing communities of color, creates skepticism that is born out of real lived experience. And it is my job as an elected official to break that down, not with words, but with actions. My actions in the 20th Ward, helping to bring some of our most challenged neighborhoods into positions of growth for the first time in decades, is what I'll bring citywide. I have a firm commitment to racial reconciliation and bringing all people to the table. I believe all of us, all St. Louisans, have a role and a responsibility to play in addressing the racism, the structural racism that has held our city back for longer than any of us have been alive.
Thank you. We have a number of topics we need to get to this evening. Up next is issues of crime and criminal justice. Our first question comes from our panel, Rachel Lipman of St. Louis Public Radio.
Thank you, Ruth. Alderwoman Spencer and Treasurer Jones, both of you take sort of holistic, long-term approaches to really addressing the root causes of violent crime. But what can or should the mayor be doing right now to save lives in the city? Alderwoman Spencer, I'll address this question to you first.
Absolutely. This is where a plan to address violence is very important. We need a mayor who walks into the mayor's office on day one with an actual plan, and that's where I come in. I have built a 10-step plan to start to address violence on day one. I built this plan by going to other cities, numerous other cities that have been successful at addressing violence. We're going to start by bringing in focused deterrence. This is a program that can start to bring down the homicide rate immediately. We're going to get the basics right, like answering 911 calls, recognizing that over 30% of our 911 calls are answered by a recording rather than a trained dispatcher. And we are going to focus on public safety outside of the police department by putting in place on day one a problem landlord unit to hold accountable those problem landlords that have been holding back our communities. And lastly, we're going to build trust in our neighborhoods by right off the bat expanding the social workers within our police department and overhauling the police policies by enacting a comprehensive police reform package that should address the policies and the disparities in the way in which we interact with our general public.
Treasurer Jones, same question to you. What should the mayor do immediately to act to save lives?
I think immediately we need to declare gun violence as a public health crisis, and that brings everybody in the table or to the table in the region. That means our neighbors to the west and the east. That also means that we need to acknowledge our current system isn't working because we don't have a plan. So we also need to make sure that that we can restore trust. Right now, we don't. All of the complaints that people file with Internal Affairs don't make it to the Citizen Oversight Board. So we need to make sure that that happens so we can rebuild trust in that process. And then I'm glad the Alderwoman likes focused deterrence and social workers in the police department. I've been talking about that since 2016, the last time I ran. And so absolutely we need to put different professionals in the police department so we can deploy the right professional to the right call and make sure that police are freed up to do police-involved work and solve violent crime.
Treasurer Jones, I'll start this question for you. How will you know if the long-term plans that you want to implement are working?
We'll see a reduced gun violence in our city. We'll have increased trust. We will survey our citizens to make sure that they are satisfied with the services that we provide. And I think the number one metric that we can measure is the number of police-involved shootings. We are number one in the country for police-involved shootings, and that's the number one metric that we need to make sure it goes down to zero.
Alderwoman Spencer, same question to you. How will you know your plans are working?
We'll know our plans are working when the homicide rate comes down significantly. I believe that putting in place my 10-step crime plan, just like we've seen in other cities, will start to bring down the homicide rate immediately. I project that we can do that 30% reduction in just my first term. We need to eliminate children being killed at the hands of guns. And yes, we also need to address police-involved shootings. We also need to recognize that our general public is in danger every single day. We are failing to address this massive homicide rate. When I'm elected mayor, pulling in those immediate reforms to public safety, putting in place policing outside the police department within other city departments that can start to address public safety beyond policing will start to be effective immediately.
Yesterday, federal prosecutors failed to get any guilty verdicts in the case of 3 white officers accused of beating a black officer who was undercover. They thought he was a protester, and federal prosecutors said race was a factor. If you were in office yesterday, what would your reaction have been, Alderwoman Spencer?
My reaction yesterday wouldn't changed. Outrage. I was horrified by the verdict, quite frankly. I know so many police officers within the police department who are officers of color who have experienced racism within our police department. I know so many residents in the city of St. Louis that have experienced racism at the hands of our police department. And that is why police reform is critical to the public safety in general. We are putting our officers at risk, our good officers, the many good officers who serve, by failing to root out racism within our police department. We're putting our general public at greater danger for failing to do this as well. And when I'm elected mayor, we're going to root out racism within our police department and within all city departments. My reaction remains horrified by the verdict.
We have a black police chief. Is he responsible? Is he failing in that department?
I do believe, leaning into my friends, the police officers within the police department, that Chief Hayden has done a good job moving in the right direction, but I don't believe it's fast enough. What is holding that back is something I cannot determine from the seat in which I currently hold. But when I'm elected mayor, we will get to the bottom of it. We will have a zero tolerance policy for stepping outside of the bounds of any kind within our police department. We need to rebuild trust. It's very clear that we have a disconnect between our community and our police department, and this is failing to address public safety from a very general sense.
Treasurer Jones, kind of two parts there. We've covered the non-guilty verdict and then Chief Hayden.
Like so many of my friends, I was outraged by the not guilty verdict, but let's address the elephant in the room. We still have two separate police unions, one for black officers and one for white officers. And until police can trust each other, how can we trust them, or how can our community develop trust in the police department? So we have some real work to do. We can't reform our way out of this. We have to transform our way out of this. We have to transform the culture and the entire police department from one that leads with an arrest and incarcerate model to one that leads with prevention. And you know, I also tracked the trial, and I saw how, you know, that blue line of silence, they were taking up for each other in the courtroom. So we have to break that up. And in order to do that, we need to have accountability from the top down and from the bottom up.
Treasurer Jones, you have already said that you would not welcome Jeff Rorta of the St. Louis Police Officers Association to be at your table. Why not? Why is he the problem here?
Because Jeff Rorta continues to gaslight and spew racism in our police department and in this region. He has made money off of our pain, off of Ferguson, and he is no longer welcome at my table. And if the Police Officers Association wants a seat at my table, they will get rid of Jeff Rorta.
Alderwoman Spencer, same question to you. Will Jeff Rorta have a seat at your table? Will you make the same promise as Treasurer Jones?
Sure. I have been calling for the dismissal of Jeff Rorta since 2016, right after I took office. His rhetoric has been divisive and counterproductive to moving our city forward.
A quick question for both of you. The SLMPD rank and file would be need for transform, reform, accountability. How would you engage with the rank and file officers who would be needed? Alderwoman Spencer, quickly to you.
Sure. You know, engaging in our rank and file is something I do as an alderman on a regular basis. I lean into the captain of the 3rd District, where I represent, to help guide what we can and should be doing in the communities I represent, taking this citywide, making sure that our mayor is available to those officers, those folks who are putting their lives on the line on day one. But leaning into the Ethical Society of Police, with whom I have a great relationship, a working relationship for many years now, being guided by those officers who represent diversity in our community to better address, to address the racism within our police department and to build policies that better serve our citizens.
Treasurer Jones, same question to you. How would you engage rank and file?
See, this is where experience comes into play and where it matters. I was the HR director at a public health clinic for several years. And when I took over as the treasurer, the morale was significantly low amongst all of our employees. And so we brought in some consultants to make sure that we talk to every employee and really take their temperature. I don't think that employees, officers, anyone in the city feels like that their voice is being heard, and that's the first step. We have to open the lines of communication and then give the officers what they need to do their jobs, or have that start that negotiation to see what they need to do their jobs. I've done that in the treasurer's office, totally transform those two departments to now the morale is high. They're being paid well, and they feel appreciated for the work that they do for the city of St. Louis. That's the same approach that I would take transforming city departments as mayor.
I want to go to something we got from a viewer or a listener. Alicia Hernandez pointed out a little overlap in your positions here on the surveillance planes that were in the news for a while, that you both opposed surveillance planes, but she points out millions have been put into the real-time crime center, and police surveillance tech is still a continued tactic to address crime. A lot of cameras go into the real-time crime center. How would you protect our privacy rights and approach attempts to bring new surveillance tech? Treasurer Jones.
I was against the surveillance camera bill and felt like surveillance planes are tools of war. And St. Louis is not a war zone, and that's not the way we need to be policed. And as far as the cameras that are existing on our streets now, we need to take every step to make sure that people's rights are protected, their civil liberties are protected as we collect this data from cameras that are all over our city. And so I would work with the ACLU and other organizations that protect people's civil liberties to make sure that we are protecting our citizens' rights, because that's paramount.
Alderwoman Spencer, same question. How do you protect privacy rights when you're talking about police surveillance?
Sure. The surveillance plane concept that we considered last year was something that I was staunchly opposed to, simply because we did not have any protections for our citizens' basic civil liberties. Through the last legislative session, we have considered one significant bill put forward by the ACLU. This is an area that I have experience in, having considered that bill and walked through the ins and outs of how we can best protect the civil liberties of our citizens at the guidance of our ACLU. And when elected mayor, I'm going to take those civil liberties very seriously, and we're going to sit down and build a policy that first and foremost protects our rights and articulates to the general public when and how the city can and is collecting data. I think cameras play a role here. You know, when you're looking at public spaces, particularly our parks and our recreation centers, I have been a proponent in considering putting cameras in those public spaces to protect our families and the young people who need to have an expectation of safety while in those public spaces. And so I do think there's room for expanding that, but we have to do it with protecting our citizens' rights first.
There's been a lot of conversation recently about the city's jails, closing the workhouse, and specifically a March 12th task force report that looked at the uprising at the Criminal Justice Center in February. There are 68 recommendations in that report. 13 of them have been considered urgent. Have you read the report, and what recommendations would you prioritize? Alderwoman Spencer, this question is to you first.
Sure. The report, we should not be surprised with the dysfunction in our city jails. We know from listening to folks that are housed there, our detainees, that we've had problems in both of our incarceration facilities for many, many years. The fact that just last month we recognized that the locks were not working in our maximum security jail cells should cause our jaws to drop. This is unbelievable, and quite frankly, it's unacceptable. So when elected mayor, I will be taking that report. It has been some time, Rachel, since I've read it. To my recollection, having read through it, there's nothing in there that I would not commit to implementing. They're common sense reforms to the incarceration facilities, and we have to recognize that it is our job, our duty as a city to protect those that we have in custody.
Treasurer Jones, same question to you. Have you read the report, and which of those recommendations would you prioritize?
I, like everyone, watched in horror as we saw our detainees break windows to be heard, because Martin Luther King once said that riots are the language of the unheard. And this was indicative of problems that have been going on for months at our city's detention center. Number one, we need to realize that these are detainees. They have not yet been charged. And so we need to do what we can to move them through the system and work with the circuit attorney's office, and also see which ones can go to diversion programs, number one. Number two, we need to address how there are overdoses in the city jail and a whole host of other problems that are going on. Number three, their complaints are going unanswered. Their complaints should go to the Citizen Oversight Board, and I will see to it that that happens. And the last thing, that report talked about building a new jail. We are not about to build a new jail in the city of St. Louis.
We're nearing the halfway mark in our discussion, and the next topic affects not just the St. Louis region, but the entire country. coronavirus and the pandemic. The first question from Casey Nolan.
Okay, let's talk about the money that we think the city will get from the federal government. More than $500 million we're expecting to deal with COVID. How specifically can you ensure fairness in how that money is spent, where it's spent, and what's the first thing you want to spend it on? Alderwoman?
Oh, I think fairness and transparency has got to be key. And this is a real difference in the way in which I handle things between my opponent and I. I mentioned on the front end that my opponent has a track record of issuing no-bid contracts. I will ensure, when elected mayor, that we have an open auditing process throughout this spending of this unprecedented amount of money. We need to recognize that this $500 million is a once-in-a-century opportunity for the city of St. Louis to change the course of our city's history. We have to recognize that the reason why the city is getting so much money, 5 times the national average, is because of the real challenges that our city is facing, including our housing decay, our poverty, and the stagnant economy that has plagued our city for decades. So when I'm elected mayor, I'll put that money to use right away. We have a plan that I've outlined on my website, caraspencer4mayor.com, and it goes through how we are going to use those funds to address those underlying issues, starting with housing stabilization. We're going to give folks the funds they need to stabilize their homes, to stay in their homes, to pay their rent and mortgage, and make sure that we are positioning our people and our entrepreneurs, our small business community to reopen following COVID and to position them for growth.
Treasurer Jones, and do you want to have an answer? Do you have an answer? Do you want to address no big contracts?
Well, you know, it's funny that the Alderwoman would bring up no big contracts and transparency when she failed to report $13,000 in contributions to her own campaign. So if she can't report that, then how do we trust her to spend $500 million? But I do want to talk about the direct relief portion of the plan that's also on my website. We will provide rent, mortgage, and utility assistance, small business assistance, as well as assistance to our unhoused, which have really been hurt through this pandemic. We will also set up a transparency portal. I already have one on my website at stltreasurer.org. If you want to see all of our contracts, everything is already there for everybody to see. We will expand public Wi-Fi in public spaces. Tons of children did not have access to Wi-Fi while they were at home, so we will make sure that they have that available. And then also we'll stand up mass vaccination and mobile vaccination clinics with a key focus on those who are skeptical of getting the vaccine and making sure that they have education so they can make the best decisions for themselves and their families.
Casey, if I may, I need to clear something up. There was not a single contribution to my campaign that wasn't reported. While there was a small hiccup in the time during which it was reported, under no circumstance did we fail to report a single issue. On the other hand, if we're going to talk about transparency, we should look at how transparent the Treasurer's Office currently is. If you go to the St. Louis Treasurer's website right now and look up the 2020 report, it's a whopping one page to describe the ongoings of financial happenings in our Treasurer's Office and our parking fund for the last full year. When I'm elected mayor, we will take transparency seriously, and we will make sure that every single contract, every single expenditure is accounted for, just like you see on the city's budget, as opposed to how we handle it currently. If we want to see how the transparency of the $500,000 would be handled under the treasurer, all we have to do is look at the treasurer's transparency on her website right now.
Treasurer?
Well, if she had filed her reports on time, then we wouldn't have had to file. There wouldn't have been an ethics report filed against her for failing to report those contributions in a timely fashion right before the March primary. So that is the issue. That is what it is, and so I stand on what I said.
What do you say to her criticism of the transparency of your office currently?
We are very transparent. You can go to stltreasurer.org and look up our transparency portal and see for yourself.
We received a question from Twitter about participatory budgeting. Some wards in the city use this for their ward capital funds, which is spending on sidewalks, basketball courts, etc., projects in the ward. In a broader sense here for the federal relief money, will the community have any role in your administration, in deciding how these millions in federal relief will be spent? Treasurer Jones, you first.
Yes, in the plan that we released earlier this week, we are setting aside a pot of funds for participatory budgeting because these are your tax dollars coming to your city and you deserve a voice in how those tax dollars will be spent. We've had several town halls already through this campaign, and we'll continue to have town halls as I'm elected mayor so we can engage the public and letting us know where the needs are. I don't pretend to know everything. And so I will be out in the community. It's important that we show up in our communities to make sure that this happens with them, not to them.
Alderwoman Spencer, same question to you on participatory budgeting.
You know, the public input is so important in how we spend our budget. That's why when we're looking at the city's budget, we have public hearings. Looking at the treasurer's track record and spending parking funds, there is no public input. In fact, last year, the treasurer signed a $7 million contract with a major campaign contributor. She was the sole signatory on that contract. There was not even any public input, from my understanding, when we privatized the function of of parking enforcement. So we should look at our candidates' history and not just our words and how we are going to take the public funds and take public input. When I'm elected mayor, public input, transparency, and public dialogue will not just be something I talk about during election season, it'll be something I enact, not when I'm running for higher office, but when I'm in the office that I'm currently in.
Treasurer Jones?
Yes, so, the Alderwoman likes to harp on this a lot, and let me tell you the truth. The state auditor reviewed my office, and I got the second highest rating on that audit, which is just like the comptroller did. There's nothing nefarious about this contract. We saved the city $5 million with this contract. And we should ask the Alderwoman how many contributions she's taken from people who are doing developments in her ward. If that were the litmus test, then nobody would be doing business with the city of St. Louis.
I'll respond to that. There absolutely has been documented issues with the audit of the Treasurer's Department. In fact, 17 out of 26 contracts had no bid or proposal associated with them. That's a whopping 65% of all contracts coming out of the Treasurer's office had no transparency associated. There's absolutely a problem with this. We not only need a mayor that we can trust, we need a mayor with a team we can trust. The Deputy Chief of Staff of the Mayor's Office pled guilty last year for embezzlement from an East St. Louis charity just last year. And the underwriting entity that is underwriting $55 million worth of bonds for the Treasurer's Office had an SEC violation so large that it went belly up the entire entity. Look, we need transparency in city government. I have been fighting against special interests, not one time, but every single time at City Hall. And to conflate a day late and filing out a campaign contribution, which all were filed with a failure to do fair and open bidding processes, just because it's legal, Treasurer, does not mean it's right.
Treasurer Jones will give you the chance to respond, and then we'll move on to the next topic.
Thank you. You know, we should ask the Alderwoman why the firefighters want her to be mayor so bad, because they gave her $7,400 in exchange for their endorsement of her as she voted for this pension bill that's going to, that if it was approved, because it was not approved by the mayor and the budget director and the comptroller were against it, it would have increased our pension costs, it would have ruined our credit rating, and it would have been detrimental to our budget. And we cannot use American Recovery Act funds to fill pension budget holes. So, you know, we can go back and forth all day, but there are plenty of examples that we can bring up.
The accusation that I am doing the bidding of the fire department is unconscionable. Do I support our first responders? You betcha. Do I support them having a pension? You betcha. But is that a quid pro quo? Absolutely not. Let's take a look at who's funding the Treasurer's campaign. If there were any doubt about who the status quo in this election was, the filing yesterday lays bare who is funding whose campaign. All of the old cronies whose names we know, the establishment candidate who has raised the most money, we're talking about the McKees, the Rainfords, and those who have been trying to privatize our airport have all lined up behind my opponent.
Ladies,
May I?
we're going to have to move on to another
May I?
topic.
No,
Are
I'm sorry.
Go
I'm
ahead. Go
sorry.
ahead, Treasurer.
You know, we want to talk about status quo. Ben Shamel, Jim Shrewsbury are the epitome of the old guard, and they are behind Cara Spencer. So we can go back and forth. You know, these people live in our communities. They are voters, and they support the candidates who they want to support. So if we want to go back and forth on who the status quo is, Ben Shamel and Jim Shrewsbury are the oldest of the old guard and are firmly behind Cara Spencer.
Our next topic is, we're going to have a community question now. The subject is affordable housing, and this is what Daniel Feldstein told us. He said both candidates want to invest in the poor neighborhoods of St. Louis and address racial inequity, but how are we doing that without causing gentrification? Not how are we investing, but how are we preventing that specifically? Treasurer Jones, if you could answer first.
Yes, absolutely. Again, the people closest to the solution are closest to the problem. I've been born and raised and currently live in North St. Louis. I live close to where I was born at St. Luke's Hospital, which is now the Del Mar Divine. And I've seen my neighborhood transform, but I want to make sure that development happens with the community, not to the community. So that means reforming SLDC to have more neighborhood officers to take the neighborhoods through development processes and develop a real plan that happens with the community. And that also means our policies. How do we reform our policies to make sure that we don't push people out as neighborhoods start to improve, and so they can also participate in the generational wealth that will be built in these communities? Because as treasurer, I have been laser focused on making sure that we reduce the racial wealth gap, which the last time I checked, the average white family has 10 times the wealth of the average black family, and we need to reduce the racial wealth gap and the income gap, and I'm the mayor to do that.
And how would you address this issue, Alderwoman Spencer?
Well, addressing the racial income gap is an important aspect of this, and I have to commend the treasurer for having the Office of Financial Empowerment. It's a laudable goal, but unfortunately, the Office of Financial Empowerment isn't working. Over the last 10 years, we have seen home ownership, particularly in the black community here in the city of St. Louis, drop, and the income gap widen. So when I'm elected mayor, we're going to invest in giving our families, particularly north of Del Mar, the best and most irreplaceable way in which families can build wealth, and that's through home ownership. We're going to take the American Recovery funds, and we're going to give folks down payments to actually buy their first home. What I'm going to do to make sure that we don't see gentrification as a result is lean into my experience in the 20th Ward. We have engaged in development here in these neighborhoods that have been equitable, not just by investing in affordable housing, but making sure that they're woven into the same neighborhoods, the same blocks as market rate development. And that's how you see a long-term strategy for making sure that we're not pricing out our neighbors.
The city's moratorium on evictions for non-payment of rent is set to expire on April 5th. Now, obviously, whether or not that moratorium is extended is the purview of the judicial branch, not of the mayor. But how would you cushion the blow if and when the moratorium expires and eviction cases are again processed? Alderwoman Spencer, we'll start with you.
Making sure we don't have major housing disruption is going to be a key piece of deploying the federal funds right off the bat. So as mayor, what I'm going to do with those recovery funds is get them into the hands of our renters and those who owe lots and lots on their mortgages right away. It's important that we don't see that disruption. And so getting those funds through the city in an efficient and effective manner into the hands of those who need it most is going to be paramount.
Treasurer Jones?
Our current waiting list for people who are waiting for rent and mortgage assistance is 9,000 families long because it is an arduous process and takes a long time. So as treasurer, I have experience in transforming departments. And so we will transform this program and make sure that the aid gets to those who need it most. And we'll streamline that process to make sure that people can get it quicker than they currently have been. Again, using the American Recovery Act funds to make sure that we can make sure that people can stay in their homes, in their apartments.
Treasurer Jones, a real quick follow-up, and then Alderwoman Spencer, I'll get to you with the same question. How do you help maybe a small landlord who has one or two buildings, who doesn't want to put people out on the street, but maybe can't pay the bills right now? How should they get assistance?
I've extended direct relief to include rent and mortgage assistance. So it's not just rent assistance, it's rent, mortgage, and utility assistance.
Alderwoman Spencer?
Yeah, the treasurer's right. The wait list is way too long. Communication is going to be key here, Rachel, and communication is an incredibly important piece to how we're going to get that information out. It's going to start by updating our website, and this is a real difference in how the treasurer and I are going to approach this. If you look at the treasurer's website right now, it tells you that parking will be resuming in June. Is that June of this year, June of next year? I don't know, you click to learn more and there's no information to be found. We have to take seriously how we communicate vital information to the general public. And when I'm elected mayor, I will be taking this very seriously and making sure that vital information, that critical information is available first and foremost on our website.
Treasurer, would you like to take a moment to clear up some confusion about parking enforcement and its current status?
Yes, absolutely. If you go to www.parklouisstl.com, that is the website that you find all of our information about parking and parking enforcement, as well as our payment plan. That's one of the things that we started in June to prevent people from getting their cars towed. So if you have a high balance, you can go to our website and apply for the parking payment plan and make sure that your car doesn't get towed for high outstanding balances.
Developers who might have their eye on some of our empty lots might be worried that the city's choosing between the two so-called progressive candidates. You know, a lot of times they'll tell us they need tax breaks to get big projects done that can be transformative for the city. Are those days done, or does a developer have a seat at the table in your administration, Treasurer Jones?
Yes, absolutely. It's going to take all of us, developers included, in order to move our city forward and transform our city. The built environment is definitely a part of that, but we should not lead with incentives. We need to make sure that our current tax incentives are delivered fairly and equitable. We need to attach community benefit agreements to development projects, and we need developers to consider doing mixed income and affordable housing in North St. Louis and develop a strategy that works with and for our neighbors in North St. Louis. So, you know, developers are definitely welcome at the table, but we're going to have to take a good look at our tax incentives to make sure that we're getting the most bang for our buck.
Alderwoman, I've heard you say some similar things. Any difference between the two of you on this topic?
Oh, there's a big difference between the two of us when it comes to incentives. Look, developers aren't magically showing up to North St. Louis to redevelop there. Incentives are going to have to be a very important piece of the puzzle. And a key distinction between how the two of us will address this is that I plan, when elected mayor, to fund St. Louis Development Corporation, that entity that issues tax incentives, with our general revenue. We're one of the only cities in the nation that doesn't invest in investing in our lower income neighborhoods. And a failure to do this, relying on the developer fees to fund that St. Louis Development Corporation, means that we are focusing on those developments that generate the most fees. And when I'm elected mayor, we're going to reorient this, put our tax dollars into reinvesting in North St. Louis, because a failure to do so is a failure to invest in our city's future.
Thank you very much. Affordable housing is an essential component of quality of life, and that is our next topic of conversation. Rachel has a viewer question. Rachel?
We got a question from Emmett M., and he wrote, "What public services do you think need the most attention, and how would you work to strengthen them?" Alderwoman Spencer, question to you first.
Public services. Well, clearly we have to address public safety. And I talked a little bit earlier about how we're going to address public safety beyond the police department, holding our landlords, our property owners, those who are parking their financial assets in the city of St. Louis, accountable for letting their properties decay will be a key area that I'm going to invest in. Not only does this make sense in stabilizing and making our neighborhoods safer, it makes financial sense. We know that every dollar we put in the building division returns $1.07 to the general fund. So when I'm elected mayor, we're going to get serious about investing and holding those absentee property owners accountable for the properties that are decaying in our neighborhoods.
Treasurer Jones?
I believe that our services haven't been delivered on an equal basis through our city. So we need to also focus on trash pickup and illegal dumping in neighborhoods. Most of that illegal dumping happens in North St. Louis and communities of color. I think we need to invest in the Department of Health and make sure that we are safe coming out of this pandemic. And then also, again, I agree with the Alderwoman. We need to hold slumlords accountable and make sure that they are respecting the rights of our tenants. And I would propose a Tenants' Bill of Rights in order to do that.
I have a real quick follow-up question for both of you. What do you do, Treasurer Jones, when the city is the slumlord? When the city has the vacant lot or the derelict building?
Well, the city does own a whole host of vacant property and vacant buildings, and we need to totally revamp LRA and our process for turning these properties back over to tax-generating properties. And so that is also will be a key focus of my administration, really streamlining that process, taking out the barriers to success, and also making sure, again, that as these properties go back on the tax rolls, that we do not gentrify the neighborhoods that they're located in.
Alderwoman Spencer, what do you do when the city is the problem landlord?
Sure, and the city is the problem landlord for over 10,000 properties in the city of St. Louis. And this is where understanding how the city government as a whole, rather than one department, is going to be very important in the next administration. The St. Louis Development Corporation is the entity that owns those city-owned parcels that we talked about earlier, and a failure to invest our general fund under the platform of my opponent will result in a failure to have the funds we need to stabilize and address the vacancy in those city-owned parcels. So going back to what I talked about earlier, investing in our St. Louis Development Corporation with our tax dollars, our general fund, so that entity can not only have the funds they need to keep those properties mowed and secured, but investing in making sure that they're stabilized and can be put on the open market for sale and make sense for the private investment community, even our small homeowners, to purchase them.
Here's a big picture question. Kenneth McElroy wants to know, what is your vision of North St. Louis in the next 4 years? Treasurer Jones.
Oh, wow. This is a great question because growing up as a little girl in North St. Louis, I used to walk up and down West Florissant to go to school, to go to F&G Foods on West Florissant, to go to the Walnut Park Library. And when I go back to my old neighborhood, I see that houses are now boarded up. There's not a lot of industry around there. There are very few grocery stores. There's bank deserts. And so a redevelopment of North St. Louis means working with the neighbors and the neighborhoods there that I already know, that trust me and trust that I have their best interests at heart. Working with them to develop a master plan to redevelop North St. Louis and make it the crown jewel that it used to be. That means making sure that we keep Sumner High School open and other high schools, that we repopulate North St. Louis with mixed income and affordable housing. That means that we have a commercial industry and healthy restaurant options and just a whole host of commercial industry in North St. Louis. And again, this development is only a dream of mine, but it happens with the community for people who show up and people who the community trusts.
Alderwoman Spencer, in the next 4 years, what will North St. Louis look like?
Sure. Well, if there's any doubt that there is structural racism in the city of St. Louis, just drive to an African-American neighborhood, predominantly African-American neighborhood in the city of St. Louis, to the north of Delmar, or like the ones I represent, and you see needles in the street, boarded up shops, and vacant buildings on every block. My vision for North St. Louis looks a lot like what we have been working on and successful at doing in the 20th Ward. When I took over, we had several hundred LRA city-owned parcels, but in my first term, we turned over half of those into the hands of private citizens who are now living in them. We increased building permits by over 1,000% in just 4 years, and we made major investments in every single one of our parks. So my vision for the North St. Louis looks a lot like what we have been successful at doing in the 20th Ward. As mayor, I'm going to take that energy, that investment, that strategy of stabilizing blocks, integrating affordable housing with market rate development through every single neighborhood in the city of St. Louis, and most importantly, investing in those public spaces.
Thank you very much. We have about 7 minutes remaining, and our last topic will involve education and children. Casey, the question's yours.
Okay, and let's get this out of the way. The mayor does not control the schools. You don't have an appointment to the school board. You don't control the school's budget. But what can the mayor do for the city schools? This is an issue that's top of mind for a lot of people. Treasurer Jones.
Yes, this is where having experience working with our school district comes, or where it matters. Since 2015, I started the College Kids Children's Savings Account program, which gives a college savings account to every kindergarten child in a public school. We currently have over 18,000 children with over $1.4 million saved for their futures. I look forward to expanding this program with our schools to make sure that our kids graduate. Not only do they have an account when they enter, but when they graduate, they'll graduate with 3 things: a diploma, a credit report, and an offer letter to the college of their choice, and making sure that we provide the funds for them to succeed wherever they decide to go for post-secondary education. But we need to make sure that, one of the things I'll do is have an education liaison in the mayor's office, and their sole responsibility will be to work with our school leaders, our teachers, our students, to make sure that every building that's open, no matter what zip code it's located in, is giving a high-quality education to all of our children. That also means pressing the stop button on opening new schools. We are closing schools at a fast pace, and because we're losing population. So we need to make sure that our schools are delivering a quality education no matter where they're located, because education and economic development go hand in hand. We cannot expect people to move back to our city if our education system isn't all that it can be.
Alderwoman Spencer, what will you do as mayor for schools?
This is an area where I take personally as a mom who chooses to educate her child within the city of St. Louis. I'm the only candidate in this race who chooses to educate her child within the city limits. And while I do not judge anybody for where they choose to educate their children, our choices matter, and we cannot have an open and honest dialogue about this without talking about those choices we make. So when I come at policy related to education, I come from personal experience here in the city of St. Louis. Looking at the proposed closure of several schools earlier this year, I sat down with the elected school board and their superintendent to lean into St. Louis public schools to ask them what can and should our administration do to support our St. Louis public school kids. And that is the lens through which I built my education policy. It centers around our St. Louis public school children, and it calls for a moratorium on new schools until we develop a plan to give a quality education to every kid in the city of St. Louis. It looks like giving our educators a seat at the table when issuing tax incentives that take from their bottom line. And lastly, it includes a commitment from the mayor's office to push for funding for a full early education policy in the city of St. Louis, and funds to provide for a special education district in the city of St. Louis that can help our children, our many children who need a little extra outside of the traditional learning experience.
Treasurer Jones, I wanted to give you a chance to respond because the choices you made for your son were addressed. Is there any comment that you would like to make?
Where anybody chooses to educate their son or their daughter is their choice, and I'm not going to sit here and pontificate about where my son goes to school or brag about it. I made the best choice that was best for me and my family.
Quick question to both of you. Should the city re-enter the county? Alderwoman.
I think this should be on the table. Until we have a real regional approach to economic development and policy in general, the city of St. Louis, the region, will continue to stagnate. We have failed to grow for the last 10 years during a booming economic environment nationally. We performed at a quarter of the national average, not in the city of St. Louis, but as the region as a whole.
We're going to have to cut you off. I'm so sorry, but just quickly. Yes or no, should the city re-enter the county?
We missed an opportunity when we didn't appoint the Board of Freeholders. I think we need to continue that process.
Okay. That is all the time that we have for now. We do have time, though, for our closing remarks. I want to thank Tishaura Jones and Cara Spencer, journalists Rachel Lippman and Casey Nolan, as well as media partners 9 PBS. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Closing remarks. I am getting so far ahead of myself. You go first, Alderwoman. 60 seconds.
Great. Well, thank you all for hosting this important dialogue, and thank you to the viewers who tuned in all the way to the end. If you, like me, believe this is a critical moment for the city of St. Louis, I'd like you to imagine a city 5 years from now with safer neighborhoods, families in our vacant homes, and a growing population, a bustling riverfront, the delivery of city services equitably in every neighborhood, paved city streets, and a city hall that works for you. My opponent touts her experience, 20 years in elected office here in the city of St. Louis. And if you think we're heading in the right direction in these last 2 decades of decline, then I'm not the candidate for you. But if you're ready for real change, then vote for me, Cara Spencer, on April 6th. Let's reshape St. Louis together.
Your closing remarks.
Thank you for joining us this evening. When I was a little girl growing up in the Hamilton Heights, Wells Goodfellow and Walnut Park neighborhoods, I wanted to be many things, but going into politics was never one of them. Well, my mama, God rest her soul, used to say the quickest way to make God laugh is to tell him what you would never do. See, it's one thing to have a platform, but it's something totally different to turn that platform into a reality. And that's exactly what I've done in the Treasurer's office the last 8 years. I'm the only candidate with the executive experience of turning a platform into a reality, the management experience of managing a budget of millions of dollars and a staff of hundreds of people, and the relationships on the local, state, and national level to put St. Louis back on the map. We don't have time for leadership to learn on the job. We need a mayor who's ready to lead, govern, and unify on day one, and I will be that mayor. So text Team TJ to 77948 to get involved today.
What are you going to do in the first 100 days, the number one thing?
We're going to make sure that the vaccines are in the arms of our most vulnerable on day one.
We're going to close the workhouse and make sure that we do a top-to-bottom audit of all city departments.
Okay, I think we might have one more question that we can get in here. The mayor is not a dictator, as we all know, but how are your relationships with the other power players in the city going to go? I can't imagine you're friendly with everybody.
Well, I've been endorsed by elected officials in 23 out of 28 wards. I'm endorsed by Dr. Sam Page, supported by Wesley Bell, and also have relationships with elected officials across the Mississippi River. So I have a whole host of endorsements, and I have the existing relationships, and I'm ready to lead, govern, and unify on day one.
Alderwoman Spencer, 20 seconds.
The only endorsement I'm interested in is the endorsement of the voters of the city of St. Louis. And if we agree that, if we think that the way that our elected officials regionally are moving us in the right direction, again, I'm not the candidate for you. But again, I am here to bring real change to the city of St. Louis. Vote for me on April 6th. Cara Spencer.
You've been listening to yesterday evening's debate between St. Louis mayoral candidates Treasurer Tishaura Jones and Alderwoman Cara Spencer. The election for the city's new mayor is next Tuesday, April 6th. The debate was produced by St. Louis Public Radio, 9 PBS, 5 on Your Side, and the St. Louis American. We'd like to thank candidates Cara Spencer and Tishaura Jones for joining, as well as the journalists who moderated the event, Rachel Lippman, Casey Nolan, and Ruth Azell. For more information on the candidates, as well as a video of the debate, head to stlpublicradio.org.
Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.